Well, it is May and we continue to commemorate Africa Month. So we're asking, there is a need to be cognizant of how Africans get by on a daily basis. One of our continent's means of survival is heavy reliance on aid or donations. But how can aid create sustainability as opposed to dependence on the African continent? Well, we are joined in studio to answer that very question by author and director of PEM Africa and speaker P. Pacifica Kabalira Ulwase. He paints a picture for us. P, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here with you, Naledi.
P from Rwanda.
Yes.
Well, let's get into about why you thought this was an important conversation certainly to tackle as we commemorate Africa Month, the Africa's heavy reliance on aid.
This is an extremely important conversation because there is a lot of money that is poured onto the continent in the form of aid. OECD, the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, estimated close to $60 billion just in 2020. That figure must be more now. Now, if you are going to put that amount of money on the continent, isn't it better if it is going to be sustainable? So for how long are we going to be in the same cycle that literally sucks those resources, but nothing really changes?
Yeah, and I suppose there's the argument that, well, what is it that we can do when Africa has such a massive population of many that live in extreme poverty?
Yeah.
What the solution is if aid is not the one?
And one of the things that we forget is that as much as there is aid, poverty is expensive. And the aid in the current form does not help. So, for example, if a family doesn't have decent sanitation, that means waterborne diseases, infections. Now, they could be paying less than $1 to the healthcare center nearby, but that's probably all they have. So it's a lot of money. A farmer who doesn't have inputs has to travel to go and get those inputs. It's time, it's money that he's already spending from the little he has. So poverty is very expensive, but one of the things that we also forget is that some of the scourges, like gender-based violence, for example, cannot be decoupled from poverty. One of my teams at Wheaton and Roy Partnership, where I do a lot of work, they went back to a township in West Africa, and they were going to do an impact assessment for a cook stove that a family had bought. And they were in this shack, and they asked the lady, "What has it brought to you?" Now, of course, the expectation is it's cleaner, the walls are not dark anymore, it's easier on the nose, it's not smelling bad, it's cheaper. But she said, "My husband beats me less." Because now when he wakes up and he wants breakfast, I push the button and the fire was there. I'm no longer dealing with wet coal or wet wood. And so I get beaten less by my husband. Now, my team members, they cried. Now, that is the expense of poverty, and we cannot decouple it from the violence that we are seeing, not just gender-based, but also all the conflicts that we are going through on the continent are linked to that. So surely, a more sustainable solution has to be found.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about where aid gets it wrong? And this is, I guess, where the conversation really should be going, right? That certainly the need for aid can't be taken away because of the desperation that we find many of our communities on the continent. But you talk about that needs assessment that I think is so all important.
Yes.
Right? That it's all good and well to have aid come in and deal with vulnerable communities, but how well do aid organizations understand the communities, and how big of a difference does it make that understanding in making those solutions sustainable?
More often than not, there is a question that is skipped, which is, what problem are we trying to solve?
Right.
Yeah. And sometimes, yes, we solve the problem for now, but not for tomorrow. Usually poverty systems, they are self-sustaining as well. It's like a vicious cycle. Now, any intervention that needs to help needs to break that cycle. So how can you, for example, create a system that brings the farming inputs to the farmer rather than him spending the little he has to go and look for it. That means that whoever brings it has assured that it is actually the right one, which is going to be good harvest. How do we make sure that when we invest, we are actually strengthening the systems, but also building capacity to make sure that this is going to be sustained by the market conditions in that particular intervention area. So, for example, I know that, for example, in sanitation, I was at the Africa Sun, which is a big conference for sanitation in Africa.
Yes.
They are now talking about market-based sanitation. That means that a household has to pay something in order for them to get a safe sanitation product. It is important that they do because they built a better relationship with that particular product. And recently, actually last week, I was working with an organization in Niger. It's an enterprise that helps with improved seeds. And the owner told me, I don't want to rely on aid anymore because today it's there, tomorrow it's not there.
Yes.
Yeah. But my customers, who are the farmers in that area, they are always there. I wish to find a way to have it sustained by the market conditions that I am living in. And that's what we are helping them to do. So there is a way that aid can be channeled into creating sustainable business-based solutions that are going to break the cycle, but are actually sustainable by the very market conditions that the people are living through.
So it's interesting. I think it's Cielo, an organization that obviously conducts research, has found that low-income African countries that are heavily reliant on foreign aid for supplementing basic needs, so food, water, sanitation, those very basic needs, that very little of that aid is spent on areas that are linked to economic growth. So there's a cycle of needing that reliance. Whose responsibility is it to make sure that when aid is directed into the continent, that it's sent to spaces where it is able to create some sort of sustainability? Is that for the African Union to start to synergize a policy that says this is what the aid program needs to look like on the continent?
Now, of course, one would start local. It's the local structures and local governments. I think they need to create policies that ensure that aid that comes goes towards sustainable solutions and not just aid for to trap the people in the same conditions that are going to require aid again. So I think policy making is very important. But donors as well. You find that a lot of measurements and a lot of research goes into impact on the origin of the money. Like they have scorecards and they have all of these impact assessments that sometimes are more focused on where the money is coming from, but not where the money is going. Right? So studying the problem to be solved, but actually how do we sustain it is also the donor's responsibility. And of course, what it is that we need to do is that the business community on the continent needs to assist in that area. Because what we're finding, for example, in the work that we do, we find that when we start saying sustainability, market-based systems, you need to be comfortable with talking about profit. You need to be comfortable with talking about sales. You need to be comfortable with talking about business development. And this now becomes business concepts that need to come into the picture. So you can see that it's really a holistic picture that needs to be looked at. And all players who claim to be for the development of Africa need to play a role in that.
I think this was a very important and reflective conversation around where we are with reliance on aid on the continent, and I hope that you're able to continue the conversation, hopefully, before we see, so we're able to see some sort of reform and intentional aid going into low-income countries on the continent.
Absolutely.
An absolute pleasure having you in studio, author and director of PEM Africa and speaker, Mr. P. Pacific Kabalera Oase, speaking to us and joining us here in South Africa.